The depth of punishment and loss for cheating. Dave and Rebecca Brown, a couple married for 12 years, spent an hour and a half in their first three-way court-ordered counseling session. Dave attended only because of his attorney's insistence. Post-nuptial agreements were a relatively new phenomenon in the legal system, and Dave's attorney wanted all the I's dotted and crossed. The previous 90 minutes had been devoted to the conversation between the counselor and Rebecca, and Dave sat, lips pressed together, with a notepad and pen. Periodically, he jotted something down in the notepad. Rebecca's pleas touched the heart of hardened counselor Jenny, who was also impressed by the way Rebecca accepted all the blame, dispelling any fears Dave had that her infidelity meant he had failed her in some way. Rebecca had also avoided many of the bad excuses that people in her situation inevitably come up with. Jenny was glad that Rebecca had followed this approach, as it was Jenny who had recommended this approach when they had met for the solo session 3 days before. Rebecca finally fell silent. The only sounds in the room were the faint ticking of the analog clock on the wall at their side and the scratching of Dave making notes in a notebook on his knee. Jenny let the silence linger. Experience had taught her that most people in uncomfortable situations like to fill pauses. 1 minute, 2. Jenny looked at Rebecca, who opened her mouth as if about to say something. Jenny shook her head slightly. Rebecca heeded the subtle sign and closed her mouth. Jenny decided to give Dave 1 more minute. If he remained silent, Jenny was going to suggest that Dave seriously consider what his genuinely remorseful wife was going through and initiate him into the overall statistics. Far from being once a cheater, always a cheater, those who were caught cheating and witnessed the devastation that cheating caused to those they cared about often became incredibly loyal. She waited. Dave moved, a slight smile playing across his face. Good, Jenny thought, and the corners of her mouth lifted in a half-smile. It was usually better if she could get the injured party to voluntarily contribute, rather than forcing them to do so by force. Good for you, Rebecca. I'll give you 9 out of 10 for that. Jenny's smile disappeared. She was embarrassed, and judging by the look on Rebecca's face, she was embarrassed too. Jenny came to her senses first. Now, Mr. Brown, there's no need to be rude. Your wife has exposed her most intimate parts here. As you know, I met with her privately earlier in the week, and she is genuinely humiliated that you caught her doing this and very devastated by the pain she has caused you. As she said today, her co-worker was an experienced Lothario, and she just wasn't strong enough to resist his advances. I can assure you that with both of your blessings, if you forgive her, I can work with her to give her strength and knowledge enough to make sure this never happens again. Dave only sighed. They say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I don't take the hint, Mr. Brown. Are you saying that your wife cannot learn to protect herself and therefore your feelings in the future? No, not at all, Miss Parkinson. I meant, how long have you been at university? 4 years? 6, actually. I finished my master's degree. 6 years, yes? And you've obviously learned everything. An offended Jenny straightened up. I'm sorry, Mr. Brown, that was rude and totally inappropriate. Do you think so? Preventing further protests, Dave pulled an electronic device from his pocket and pressed a button. Rebecca's voice came out of the device, begging for forgiveness. She swore it was a one-time mistake and that he, Dave, could take it to the bank. They listened as she admitted how much she had hurt him and how hurt she was that she had caused him so much pain that she had witnessed. Just then, Jenny's indignant voice interrupted loudly. Do you realize how unpleasant and inappropriate it is to record our session? Not only unpleasant, but I believe it is completely illegal in this state to record anyone without their approval and consent, and I certainly don't intend to agree to that. That's okay, because Margaret was in agreement. Jenny was too angry and embarrassed to notice that Rebecca had just dropped her chin on her chest and was successfully impersonating a beat. Jenny couldn't remember when she had been more offended. Who's Margaret? She was our counselor 2 years ago when I last caught Rebecca cheating. It was on the record then. My wife's a convincing fool, isn't she? Fooled me back then. That's for sure. Rebecca continued to stare at the floor at her feet. Dave watched with satisfaction as he and Jenny engaged in a silent competition to see who could blush the brightest. Annoyed, Jenny reflected on the thoroughness with which she had been fooled by the experienced cheater. Perhaps her embarrassment was alleviated by the realization that the reason Rebecca was such a convincing liar was because the first person she had convinced with her nonsense was Rebecca herself. Dave took the embarrassed silence of both women as an opportunity to end this farce. Just so there's no doubt about it, Rebecca, I will fully honor the terms of the marriage agreement you signed 2 years ago. And that means leaving my house with only your personal belongings, while leaving behind all the jewelry I bought you, including the 2 rings you're wearing now. Dave paused, allowing himself to replay his previous sentence with satisfaction. In a way, I suppose I should thank you. If I'd divorced your ass 2 years ago, the courts would have given you half of everything. Now you get nothing. And the only cost was that I had to swallow my pride for a while. Don't worry, you didn't hurt me this time. Despite what a good counselor says, deep down, I think I knew you'd cheat again, and that's why I never really got emotionally invested in our relationship again. Rebecca was silent, staring at the floor. The depth of the punishment and loss still hadn't gotten to her. Jenny, embarrassed by her naivety, flinched at the cold impassivity with which Dave behaved. Apparently, he was actually as emotionally unfazed as he claimed to be, or else he was an even better actor than his wife. Neither woman said a word, and the aggrieved husband continued. Give me 24 hours and I'll put your things in a box. I don't know where you'll go or what you'll do, but frankly, I don't care. The locks will be changed in an hour, so please don't embarrass us both by banging on the door. If you try to mobilize your family and our friends against me, the video clips I have of you and your lover will mysteriously end up in the possession of everyone you know. And I really mean everyone. I'm sure at least some of them won't be so understanding when they hear how you squealed when Clive pinned your ass on our marital bed. Dave paused to stop the rapid buildup of his exuberant temper. After a dozen deep breaths, he regained full control. Once the divorce is final, we can talk about your visit with Alice. Sign the divorce this week, and I'll be generous with a visit, resist, and you can only kiss her goodbye. Jenny's ears perked up at those words. Rebecca's head jerked upwards, eyes flashing a mixture of fear and anger. Neither reaction escaped Jenny's notice. Neither in their solo session nor in this joint session had Rebecca mentioned her daughter. But then she seemed like a typical 21st century narcissist, as self-centered as a spinning spinner. So fixated on what she stood to lose that everything and everyone else was sidelined. Jenny looked back and saw the pain on Rebecca's face as she finally found the words. But, you can't take my little girl away from me. She needs me. I can't live without her. The unbearable pain Rebecca felt at her soon-to-be ex-husband's words was written all over her contorted facial features. Jenny thought, if only these idiots would think of all the consequences of their actions before committing their various crimes, I'd be out of a job. She reached out and placed her hand on Rebecca's arm, hoping that she would keep the latter from a complete breakdown. After revealing himself to be an emotional dead fish in the counselor's eyes, Dave spoke completely calmly. Maybe you should have thought about this before you were, quote, seduced by an expert, unquote. It's all clearly spelled out in the contract. It says if you screw up again, you lose everything, including custody of Alice. But she needs me. No, Rebecca, she's 13 years old. I'll do just as well as you. Anyway, this isn't the place to air our dirty laundry. You cheated, I took you back, you signed a contract after the wedding and promised never to stray again. I suspected something wrong, investigated and caught you fooling around again. Don't commit a crime if you can't deal with the consequences. Isn't that what they say? Dave stood up and looked down at his soon-to-be ex-wife, who by now was kneeling on the floor with her hands folded in supplication, tears streaming down her face. The look of agony on her face showed everyone in the room that perhaps for the first time in this whole sordid affair, she was actually feeling remorse. The consequences of her impulsive actions were finally becoming apparent. Gathering the last of her strength, Rebecca took a short leap. "You will not take my Alice! I will fight you every step of the way!" The counselor stood as a helpless witness to the smirk that appeared on Dave's face. "Please do it, you traitor. My lawyer told me it's an ironclad agreement and it will give me the excuse I need to release my little videos. Try showing up in public after they're out, Rebecca." With those words, the offended husband left the room. Jenny looked at the devastated woman and sighed. She had better start now if she wanted to prevent a complete mental collapse here, especially if the aforementioned contract after the wedding was upheld in her husband's favor. Having a daughter taken from you must be every mother's nightmare. She leaned over to the sobbing woman. Dave Brown sat in his car until the adrenaline subsided and his breathing returned to normal. Then he drove home through the supermarket and liquor store, buying a bottle of bourbon for himself and a nice piece of fish for dinner for him and Alice. Salmon was her favorite. Tonight was the beginning of a new phase of their life together. What he did tonight was important. He paused with his hand on the front door handle, determined to stick to his normal routine as much as possible, for Alice's sake. Pushing the door open, Dave Brown spoke in a loud voice, well aware of Alice's increasingly impaired hearing. "Alice! Radios!" The elderly dog jumped out of his basket and, wagging his tail so hard that his hind legs slid across the floorboards, came up to greet his master. "The end